Some time later, Rent continued hunting monsters there to increase his XP. Day by day, he lived as an undead and began to adapt to the situation. Rent's body condition improved because he could easily attack monsters. The powers he learned as a human, mana, spirit, and divinity, had also increased. Typically, people only had 2 of these powers, but Rent had possessed all 3 for a long time, a rarity. Rent could channel mana and spirit into his sword. He felt his current strength was much greater than when he was still human. Soon, Rent heard the sound of a sword clashing nearby. It was a beautiful girl named Rena fighting a skeleton. After Rena defeated the skeleton, she took its magic stone and prepared to explore the labyrinth again. Rent had a comprehensive memory of adventurers in the city of Malt, but he didn't recognize Rena, assuming she was a new adventurer. Rent actually wanted to ask for the girl's help to return to the city. Unfortunately, he couldn't reveal himself to Rena directly. Rent continued to follow wherever Rena went, and a skeleton appeared near her. According to Rent, Rena had good basic sword skills, but the power behind her sword swings was still insufficient to defeat the skeleton. Moreover, Rena didn't pay much attention to her opponent's subtle movements. Rena was struggling against the skeleton as a novice adventurer. When Rena was in a tight spot, Rent saved her and introduced himself. Though Rent initially had some difficulty speaking, Rena eventually understood what he meant. Rena was surprised to meet a talking ghoul and asked why he looked that way. Was he disguising himself? Rent slowly explained that he was actually dead but somehow came back to life. Seeing Rena's fear and wariness, Rent even put away his sword. Rena expressed gratitude to Rent for saving her. Rena also asked if she could safely exit the labyrinth. She still thought Rent might kill her. However, Rent reassured her once again that he wouldn't harm her. Instead, he asked for Rena's help in buying clothes. Rent handed his money, and Rena could take her share later. Rent truly wanted to return to Malt City. After that, Rent distanced himself a bit from Rena to avoid making her feel threatened. Rena took the money and introduced herself to Rent. Rena was the daughter of a knightly family and promised to repay Rent's kindness. She asked Rent to wait in the labyrinth, and Rena began to leave, vigilant of Rent's movements. Rent knew the risks he would face later. Typically, if adventurers found a ghoul or monster like Rent, they would report it to the Adventurer Guild. However, Rent chose to trust the girl because Rena didn't seem like a traitor. On the other hand, Rena quickly returned to Malt City and went to the Adventurer Guild to inquire about something from Sheila. Some time passed, and Rent continued hunting monsters inside the labyrinth. His body had developed good combat reactions, and he felt his vision was much sharper than that of an ordinary human. Soon, Rena shouted Rent's name, bringing many items for him. After hearing this, Rent headed to the entrance of the Moon's Reflection Labyrinth. Of course, Rena wanted to ensure that it was the real Rent and not another monster. Rent replied that monsters wouldn't usually walk like him. It was Rena calling out that attracted him. They both looked awkward because the situation was truly beyond human comprehension. Rena felt that Rent's speech had become smoother compared to their first meeting. Even though Rent had told her to keep the change earlier, Rena returned the money. She explained that all the items were recommended by the Adventurer Guild. As Rent approached, Rena started moving away from him as she was still somewhat afraid and not used to seeing a ghoul like him. Rena also apologized to Rent. Rent told her there was no need to apologize, as it was a natural reaction when someone encountered a monster like him. Rena explained that she also bought some equipment to cover specific parts of Rent's body. Certainly, Rent felt very fortunate to meet such a caring and kind girl. Rent wanted to cry, but tears didn't come. He cried through his emotions, even though he didn't have a heart in his body. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Rent's current fate compared to when he was still human. When Rent tried on the robe Rena bought, he looked truly gallant like a knight, and Rent really liked the clothes. Then, Rena was pleased after seeing Rent's response, and she also bought a black mask to cover Rent's frightening face. Honestly, Rena thought that Rent was a rare monster in this labyrinth, and Rent justified Rena's thoughts because it was the truth. When Rent tried the mask, it suddenly adhered to his face. Despite Rent attempting to remove it and using his divinity power, the mask still wouldn't come off. Of course, Rena was surprised because she didn't know that the mask possibly had a cursed effect. She had checked the aura of the mask and found no curse within it. Rena bought the mask from a small vendor at a very cheap price. Rena thought that Rent's appearance could be cooler with the mask, and she didn't want others to avoid or be afraid when communicating with Rent. Rena sincerely apologized to Rent. Then, Rent told Rena that she didn't need to worry about it. Rent was confident that the mask would come off someday. He would gather money to seek help from someone with high divinity power. Rent approached Rena, who still had her head bowed to him. However, Rent restrained himself from touching Rena. Then, Rena bravely tried to hold Rent's hand. She said that she understood what Rent was feeling now. Rent wasn't a bad person, and Rena could trust him, although Rena said that her hands still trembled when holding Rent's hand.
ありがとう。いつか本当になれるまでは。
Rena also offered to help and accompany Rent to Malt City. During the journey, Rena explained that she had registered as an adventurer in the capital. However, there were many famous adventurers there, and no quests matched Rena's abilities. Due to this, Rena came to Malt City to find something she could work on. Rena was very happy to come to Malt City because she could go anywhere she wanted to become the strongest adventurer.
俺みたいなかなりレア。だが冒険者は臆病くらいがいい。命は一つだ。
After they arrived the gates of Malt City, Rent said that many people knew him there, so he wanted to enter through another gate. Rent also thanked Rena for helping him so far. He didn't want to inconvenience Rena further. Rent realized that he was an undead monster, and Rena might face problems if she brought him into the city. Most likely, Rena could lose her adventurer status for bringing Rent into the city. After hearing this, Rena insisted on helping Rent get into the city. Rent had saved her life, so at least Rena was willing to risk her fate for Rent. Then, they were allowed by the guards to enter the city after the guards verified their identities. However, the guards were suspicious of Rent's appearance since it was their first time seeing him. They even asked Rent to remove his mask. Then, Rena told the gate guards that Rent had suffered severe injuries while fighting monsters, resulting in his body and voice becoming strange. Because of that, Rena helped him buy clothes and a mask. However, Rena didn't know that the mask actually had a curse and couldn't be removed from Rent's face. Rena had tried to remove it, but it wouldn't come off. They needed to gather money to pay the church to remove the mask. Rent told the gate guards to try removing the mask to make them believe Rena's story.
呪いを解いてもらうには教会にかなりの寄付が必要です。
リナのおかげありがとう。
They finally managed to enter Malt City thanks to Rena's false story, and Rent was very grateful to her. While Rena was figuring out their next destination, Rent suddenly disappeared from Rena's view. It turned out that Rent deliberately left quietly using his powers to avoid causing more trouble and involving Rena further. In his mind, Rent promised that he would meet Rena again when he had a better appearance than what he currently had. He was confident that Rena would become a great adventurer someday. Rena was a kind and smart girl, and she took good care of her equipment. At night, Rent went straight to the house of his old friend, Lorraine Vivi. Rent knocked on her door as usual, but there was no response from Lorraine. Then, Rent tried to enter Lorraine's house, and it turned out that Lorraine was sleeping peacefully on her sofa. Rent woke up Lorraine, and she was shocked to see Rent's current condition.
何があった?
Let's go back to when Lorraine was still working on her research before Rent came over. She was researching something about evolving monsters. Lorraine planned to ask the guild about a few things to confirm something. Shortly after, Lorraine heard a knock on the door that she immediately recognized. It was Rent's distinctive knock. Lorraine felt very happy because she could finally meet Rent again. But Lorraine was confused. Why didn't Rent enter immediately as usual? Lorraine was sure that something had happened to Rent. Because of that, Lorraine pretended to be asleep on her sofa. When Rent entered Lorraine's house, he woke her up and immediately showed his hand to her. This shocked Lorraine because she actually saw an undead in front of her. After that, Rent told everything he experienced inside the labyrinth. Lorraine could hardly believe that those events were real. Then Lorraine was thinking about something that might affect Rent in the future. In Rent's mind, he admired Lorraine because she remained calm when facing him. It was no wonder that Lorraine was given the title of a great professor, sage, and adventurer. Although sometimes Lorraine treated Rent as a subject of her research, Lorraine remained a good girl who had known Rent for a long time. Then Lorraine asked Rent, "Do you, as an undead, still have the same nature as before?" Of course, Rent was startled after hearing that. He just realized that he would likely undergo a change in personality in the future. But for now, Rent didn't know how to answer Lorraine's question. Then Lorraine decided to postpone the answer. There were many things she needed to investigate from this case, and she would think about it together with Rent. Lorraine then asked, "What are your plans next?" Rent replied that he would continue to be an adventurer and wanted to achieve his dream of reaching the top rank, Mithril tier. But Rent couldn't take quests from the Adventurer Guild in his current form. Therefore, Rent asked for Lorraine's help to take quests for him to complete. Then Lorraine immediately agreed and allowed Rent to stay with her. In return, Lorraine wanted to further examine Rent's body to assist in her research. Of course, Rent was a bit hesitant because Lorraine might dissect him. But Lorraine didn't mean that. She just wanted to take some samples of Rent's flesh or skin.
まあちょっと皮膚とか肉とかくれというかもしれんが。人を何だと思っているんだ？
The next day, Lorraine took quests from the Adventurer Guild as Rent requested. She also sold the materials Rent obtained in the labyrinth to the guild. Additionally, Lorraine bought cosmetic ingredients that Rent had collected. These materials were of very high quality, and Lorraine could make a good beauty serum from them. Rent received the money and went to the blacksmith shop called Three-Pronged Harpoon. Upon arrival, Rent apologized to the female shopkeeper for his suspicious appearance. Rent just wanted to forge a new sword. The shopkeeper, named Ruka, Clope's wife, the owner of Three-Pronged Harpoon, said that Rent's current sword was accustomed to a certain mana flow and spirit, so they would create a sword with similar specifications. Then Rent also mentioned that he could use divinity power. Of course, Ruka was surprised, and she was sure that Clope would ask many questions during the sword-making process. Rent said he didn't mind, and if Clope started making the sword, he could inform Rent at Lorraine's residence.
承知いたしました。
On the other hand, Lorraine found literature explaining about ghouls. Ghouls were low-level undead with very high physical abilities. Even if their necks were severed, ghouls wouldn't die. Ghouls liked meat, especially human flesh. Many ghouls were born in the labyrinth, possibly even from human corpses. There was a case where humans were turned into low-level undead by high-level monsters. Undead came in various types, so Lorraine couldn't conclude anything for now. The literature also stated that those who turned into undead would lose their personality and human emotions. Despite Rent's current rare appearance, Lorraine felt that Rent was still Rent. She understood Rent's nature very well. Lorraine recalled the moment when she first met Rent at the Adventurer Guild. Another adventurer suggested that Lorraine take Rent with her while exploring the forest nearby. The adventurer said Lorraine didn't need to pay anything to him. Rent joined Lorraine just to gain more experience. Lorraine accepted the offer, and Rent helped her a lot during their time in the forests. Rent could guide Lorraine in fighting monsters, and he understood what Lorraine was looking for, impressing her. During their rest, Rent mentioned that many people were concerned about Lorraine, so they asked Rent to accompany her. Everyone knew Rent was a great all-around adventurer despite his young age. Moreover, Rent was the only one of the same age suitable to accompany Lorraine. Lorraine blushed a little after hearing that. Initially, she was really bored with her monotonous life. That's why Lorraine tried to adventure alone without telling anyone. When she met Rent that day, she was sure Rent could tell her more about the world. From fighting techniques, plant knowledge known by Rent, monsters, places visited by adventurers, etc. For years, they've always been together, and Lorraine has been observing Rent's progress every day. At the blacksmith shop, Ruka gave Rent a temporary sword while they worked on his new one. Rent thanked them and left. Ruka and Clope were very concerned about Rent's situation. They wanted to help Rent more, but Clope suspected that Rent was under a powerful curse and didn't want to trouble them. They believed that over time, Rent would slowly tell them about his condition. Clope said Rent would be a regular visitor to their shop. He was confident because Rent had shared his identity with them, his 3 main powers and Lorraine's residence. At least, according to them, Rent could trust them with that information. Back at Lorraine's house, Rent cooked delicious food for her. Lorraine was very happy because she hadn't eaten Rent's cooking for a long time. Lorraine also learned that Rent didn't feel hungry at the moment. Then Lorraine explained what she had read earlier. She said Rent was a different kind of ghoul from the usual ones. Rent still retained human emotions, and this might be related to existential evolution. There were various types of undead, and Rent's future body changes were still unknown. But Rent hoped to transform into a form resembling a human. Therefore, Rent would strive to increase his XP for this existential evolution. Rent believed that he could become stronger in the future.
いや、お前は本当に変わらんなと思っただけさ。
Some time passed, and Rent continued to explore the moon's reflection labyrinth, saving an adventurer named Terry. Terry's arm was slightly injured from a slime attack there, but somehow, Rent was very anxious when he saw blood from Terry's arm. Terry asked for Rent's help to kill the monsters there. Terry was forced to become an adventurer due to economic demands and debts. Initially, Rent refused because he had experienced cases of adventurers pretending to be poor, then robbing the money and other adventurers' belongings they encountered in the labyrinth. Not only that, Rent knew many negative cases from his own experiences, but Rent eventually guided Terry to the place where he met the sacred dragon before. Most likely, there were items or materials that Terry could bring. As they explored new corridors around, Rent found an empty room with a magical circle in the middle. But Terry didn't see the circle and entered the room without any caution. Rent had warned Terry to be careful, but when Terry stood right in the magical circle, he suddenly disappeared. Of course, Rent was shocked because the magical circle was likely a teleportation spell. Rent immediately followed Terry, and there was something surprising when he saw it.
ボス部屋か。